Chapter 27. Goblins in the King's House. When Cardy fell asleep, he began at once to dream. He thought he was ascending to the top of the mountain from the mouth of the mine, while singing and whistling ding dong bang, when he came upon a woman and a child who had lost their way. And from that point on, he went on dreaming of everything that had happened to him since he had thus met the princess and Lootie. How he had watched the goblins, how he had been taken by them, how he had been rescued by the princess. Everything, indeed, until he was wounded, captured, and imprisoned by the men-at-arms. And now he thought he was lying wide awake where they had lain him, when suddenly he heard a great rumbling. "The cobs are coming," he said. "They didn't believe a word I told them. Oh, the cobs will carry off the princess from under their stupid noses. Oh, they shan't, they shan't." He jumped up, as he thought, and began to dress, but to his dismay, found he was still lying in bed. "Now then, I will," he said. "Here I go, and up I am." Yet again he found himself still snug in bed. 20 times he tried, and 20 times he failed, for in fact he was not awake, only dreaming he was. At length, in an agony of despair, he fancied he heard goblins all over the house, and he gave a great cry. Then there came, as he thought, a hand upon the lock of his door. It opened, and looking up he saw a lady with white hair, carrying a silver box in her hand, entering the room. She came to his bed, he thought, stroked his head and his face with cool, soft hands, took the dressing from his leg, and rubbed it with something that smelt like roses, and then waved her hands over him 3 times. At the last wave of her hands, everything vanished, and he felt himself sinking into the profoundest slumber, and remembered nothing until he awoke in earnest. The setting moon was throwing a feeble light through the casement, and the house was in full uproar. There was the soft, heavy, multitudinous stamping, a clashing and clanging of weapons, the voices of men, the cries of women, mixed with a hideous bellowing, and which sounded almost victorious. The cobs were in the house. He sprang from the bed and hurried on some of his clothes, not forgetting his shoes, which were armed with nails. Then, spying an old hunting knife or short sword hanging on the wall, he caught at it and rushed down the stairs, guided by the sound of strife, which grew louder and louder. When he reached the ground floor, he saw the whole place was swarming. All of the goblins of the mountains seemed to be gathered there. He rushed in among them, shouting, "1, 2, hit and through, 3, 4, blast and bore." And with every rhyme he came down with a great stamp upon the feet, and cutting at the same time at their faces, executing indeed a sword dance of the wildest description. Everywhere scattered the goblins in every direction, into closets, upstairs, up chimneys, up rafters, and down into the cellars. Cardy went on stamping and slashing and singing, but he saw nothing of the people of the house until he came to the great hall, in which, the moment he entered, arose a great goblin shout. The last of the men-at-arms, and the captain himself, was on the floor, buried beneath a wallowing crowd of goblins. For, while each knight was busy defending himself as well as they could, by the stab at the thick bodies of the goblins, he soon found their heads were all but invulnerable, and the queen had attacked their legs and feet with her horrible granite shoes, and soon they were down. But the captain had got his back to the wall and stood out a little longer. The goblins had torn all of the men-at-arms to pieces, but the king had given orders that they were to carry them away alive, and each of them, 12 in the group, was standing in a knot of goblins, while many more filled the room, and they were sitting upon their prostrate bodies. Cardy burst dancing and gyrating and stamping and singing like a small whirlwind. "There it is all a hole, sir, never can be holes. What's the use of souls, sir, when they got no souls? But she's upon her foot, sir, has a granite shoe. Strong as leather boots, sir, 6 would soon go through." The queen gave a horrid howl of rage and dismay, and before she had recovered her presence of mind, Curdie had begun at the nearest group to him, and 11 of the king's men were already on their feet again. "Step on their feet!" he cried as each man rose, and in a few moments the hall was almost empty, the goblins running from it as fast as they could, shrieking and limping, and sometimes cowering as they ran and tried to cuddle their wounded feet in their hard hands, or protect them from the flight of the stamp of the men-at-arms. And now Curdie approached the group which, trusting in the queen and her shoe, had kept guard over the prostrate captain. The king sat on the captain's head, and the queen stood in front like an infernal cat, with her peculiar eyes gleaming green, and her hair half standing up on her horrid head. Her heart was quaking, however, and she kept moving about her skin-shod foot in nervous apprehension. When Curdie was within a few paces, she rushed at him, and made one tremendous stamp at his opposing foot, which he happily withdrew in time, and she caught him about the waist and went to dash him on the marble floor. But just as she caught him, he came down with all of the weight of his iron-shod shoes upon her skin-shod foot, and with a hideous howl she dropped him, squatting on the floor, and took her foot in both her hands. Meanwhile, the rest of the group of the king and his bodyguard were soon sent flying and by the men-at-arms, and they lifted the prostrate captain, who was all but crushed to death. It was some moments before he recovered his breath and consciousness. "Where is the princess?" cried Curdie again and again. No one knew, and they were all rushing all over in search of her. Through every room in the house they went, but nowhere was she to be found. Neither were any of the servants to be seen. But Curdie, who had kept the lower parts of the house, which now seemed quiet enough, began to hear a confused sound of a distant hubbub, and set off to find from whence it came. The noise grew sharper as his ears guided him to the stairs, and so down to the wine cellar. It was full of goblins, whom the butler was supplying with wine as fast as he could draw it. While the queen and her party had encountered the men-at-arms, Harelip with another company had gone off to search the house. They had captured every one they met, and when they could find no more, hurried away to carry them below to the safety of the caverns. But when the butler, who was amongst them, found that their path lay through the wine cellar, he betook himself into persuading them to taste the wine, and as he had hoped, no sooner had they tasted the wine than they wanted more. The routed goblins, on their way below, had joined them, and when Curdie had entered, they were all with outstretched hands, in which every vessel of every description, from saucepans to silver cups, were pressed around the butler, who sat atop one of the huge casks, filling and filling. Curdie cast one glance around the place before commencing his attack, and saw in the furthest corner a group of terrified domestics unwatched, but cowering without the courage to attempt their escape. Among them was the terror-stricken face of Lootie, but nowhere could be seen the princess. Seized with a horrible conviction that Harelip had carried her off, he rushed amongst them, unable for wrath to sing any more, but stamping and cutting with greater fury than ever. "Stamp on their feet! Stamp on their feet!" he shouted, and in a moment the goblins were disappearing through the hole in the floor like rats and mice. They could not vanish so fast, however, but many more goblin feet had to go limping back to their underground ways in the mountains that morning. Presently, however, they were reinforced from above by the king and his party, with the redoubtable queen at their head. Finding Curdie again busy among her unfortunate subjects, she rushed at him once more with the rage of despair, and this time gave him a bad bruise on the foot. Then a regular stamping fight got up between them, Curdie, with the point of his hunting knife, keeping her from clasping him in her mighty arms, as he watched for an opportunity to get one more good stamp on her skin-shod foot. But the queen was more wary as well as more agile than hitherto. The rest, meantime, finding their adversary thus matched for the moment, paused in their headlong hurry and began to go to the shivering group of women in the corner. As if determined to emulate his father in having a son-woman of some sort to share his future throne with, Harlip rushed at them and caught up Lootie and sped with her to the hole. She gave a great shriek, and Curdie heard and saw the plight that she was in. Gathering all his strength, he gave the queen a sudden cut across the face with his weapon, coming down as she started back with all of his weight on the proffered foot, and then sprung to Lootie's rescue. The prince had 2 defenceless feet, and soon upon both of them Curdie stamped just as he reached the hole. He had to drop his bundle and roll shrieking down into the earth. Curdie made one stab at him as he disappeared, and caught hold of the senseless Lootie. Having dragged her back to the corner, he mounted a guard over her, preparing once more to encounter the queen. Her face was streaming with blood, and her eyes flashing green lightning through it. She came on with her mouth open, her teeth grinning like a tiger, followed by the king and his bodyguard of the thickest goblins. But in the same moment rushed in the captain and his men, and ran about, stamping furiously. They dared not encounter such an onslaught. They scurried away, the queen foremost. Of course, the right thing would have been for them to take the queen and the king prisoner and hold them hostage against the princess, but they were so anxious to find her that no one thought of detaining them until it was too late. Having thus rescued the servants, they set about searching the house once more. None of them could give the least information concerning the princess. Lootie was almost silly with terror, and though scarcely able to walk, would not leave Curdie's side for a single moment. Again he allowed the others to search the house, where, except the dismayed goblin lurking here and there, they found no one, while he requested that Lootie take him up to the princess's room. She did so as submissively and obediently as if he had been the king himself. He found the bedclothes tossed about, and most of them all over the floor, while the princess's garments, they were scattered all about the room in the greatest confusion. It became too evident that the goblins had been here, and Curdie no longer had any doubts that she had been carried away by the first of their inroads. With a pang of despair, he saw how wrong they had been in not securing the king and the queen and the prince. But he was determined to find and rescue the princess, as she had found and rescued him, or else meet the worst fate that the goblins could doom him to.